Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy, and today we're going to be talking about using social media as a writer. Social media has become almost an inherent part of being a contemporary writer. It can be a huge part of an author's marketing plan, and having an online presence is pretty much expected of authors nowadays. Especially if you have a younger audience, social media is pretty much a must. Writers now exist in an online interconnected network, and by not being part of it, you miss out on endless opportunities to connect with other writers, industry professionals, and most importantly, readers. So when you're getting started with social media as a writer, you might be asking what platforms you should use. Now, of course, the general answer is kind of as many as you can that will help you reach as many people as possible. But in general, here's a breakdown of some different social media platforms and their pros and cons for building your author platform. Number one is Twitter. Writers love Twitter. My advice would be, if you don't have Twitter and you're a writer, would be to just pause this video and go make a Twitter account right now. Twitter is the go-to. I don't know what it is, but writers just flock to Twitter. They love Twitter. The writing community on Twitter is thriving, so it's pretty easy to connect with others and gain a following. Another reason why it's so important to have a following on Twitter, or at least start establishing yourself on Twitter, is because publishers consider it one of the most important platforms to have. The cons of Twitter are that the forum isn't that conducive to posting long-form content. It's not like you can really say everything you might want to say in a blog. Sure, you can post a long thread, but it's just not as effective for that. The medium is much better for being conversational and being social. The bottom line here is to get on Twitter ASAP. The writing community there is thriving, which means that as you start establishing yourself in the writing community and as a professional writer, people will be looking for you on Twitter. Next up would be Instagram. Instagram is one of the most used social media platforms. Instagram has a huge reading community, so it's a great place to connect with readers. Less so writers. Twitter is great to connect with writers. Instagram is great to connect with readers. Now, publishers don't value it as highly as they value Twitter, but you can still find a pretty big reader base there. Especially if you have a younger audience, it's worth having an Instagram account because it's going to be a pretty good way to connect with other readers. Next up is the OG, Facebook. For many younger millennials, Facebook is kind of being phased out as the go-to platform. However, it's still a good idea to have a social media presence on Facebook, have an author page, especially for certain genres like romance in particular. Facebook has a pretty large reader base that you can connect with. The bottom line here is that it's worth at least making an author fan page and focusing more attention on Facebook if you have a reader base whose demographic tends to use Facebook a lot. Next up would be Tumblr. Tumblr is great for hosting a blog or longer form content, and it's pretty easy to interact with your audience. However, the biggest con here is that it's very hard to grow a platform and reach a wide range of people. Tumblr is probably one of the hardest social media platforms to grow and gain exposure on. It's not a bad platform to have, especially if you're using it in conjunction with others, because it has some good features, especially if you want to have a blog. But it's not great to have as a singular hub as the only piece of your platform. The audience of Tumblr is also a bit younger, primarily under 25, so it's a good platform to use if you're writing YA. The bottom line with Tumblr is that it's hard to grow, but it has some good features, so if you're interested, it might be worth having in conjunction with other social media platforms that are easier to grow. And finally, let's talk about this one right here, YouTube. YouTube is a pretty new one for writers, but because it's new, might as well get started now. Like with basically any social media platform or any community, the most successful are going to be the ones who were here first. So if you want to start a YouTube channel, the best time is right now. YouTube has the benefit of feeling very personal. Your viewers feel like they actually know you, like they're in direct conversation with you, which they might not get from just reading your Twitter feed. There's room for a lot of creativity and potential to grow a relatively large audience if you have enough patience. However, it does have some cons. It's definitely the most time intensive. It takes 30 seconds to write a tweet. It can take 5 hours to make a YouTube video. You also need to go in with several skill sets. You need to know how to film and edit video, and the equipment itself can be a relatively large investment. It's not as good for socializing with other writers since the platform isn't as conversational. I find if I want to talk to someone on the YouTube platform, I talk to them on Twitter because YouTube isn't very good for that. But it's a good platform hub because it's very personable. The bottom line with YouTube is that it can be a pretty big time investment, but if you're interested in making a YouTube channel, there's no time like now. As the writing community grows and more writers and readers are going to be going to YouTube, might as well establish yourself in the community now. You'll probably also want to have a website as kind of a hub for your platform, especially if you're published or near to being published. If you're not published yet and publishing is kind of in the far distance for you, you might not have much use for a website yet, but it might be worth buying your domain name and at least starting to build your other social media platforms. So what about some general social media tips? First of all, let's talk about Twitter, because you should have Twitter. On your Twitter feed, promote other people just as much as you promote yourself. If your Twitter feed is entirely or the majority tweets promoting your new release, that can get kind of tiresome. So use your platform to promote other writers as well. You also want to be careful not to use too much cliche writer imagery when you're building your platform. So when you're creating your website or making your profile pictures and your headers, you want to avoid things like quill pens and ink, stacks of books, typewriters. You also want to avoid Scrabble tiles that spell out the word writer. That's a pretty common one. This stuff is pretty cliche, so it doesn't do much to give you an individual brand, and it's not very creative at this point. What you want to do instead is create your own specific brand. Try to have some sort of cohesive aesthetic, and if you can, match it to what you write. So on my own platforms, I usually go with kind of a nature-y type vibe, since that relates really well to my personality and also what I write. You can also use elements of your book's cover design if you have a book coming out. Use hashtag. Now the go-to for writers is hashtag #amwriting or some variation of that. So hashtag #amediting or #amwritingfantasy. These are go-to among writers. Every time I use an #amwriting hashtag on Twitter, I gain a bunch of followers or the tweet gets a lot of likes because people really actively search for this hashtag. Next up, be thoughtful. We are in an age where social media is extremely important. That means that a single tweet that's in poor taste can sink a person's reputation. Your audience's opinion of you will be hugely influenced by how you portray yourself on social media, and this will greatly reflect in whether or not they want to buy your book. So be really mindful of what you post. And finally, clean out whatever you can from your youth. If you had social media when you were fairly young, it might be time to scrub as much of that as you can, because most of us do not want our 15-year-old selves as our legacies. I definitely don't. So you might want to scroll to the very bottom of your Twitter feed and delete some old tweets, or, you know, delete that old WordPress blog that you made when you were in middle school, posted 3 poems on, and then forgot about. So those are some tips for using social media as a writer. What's your favorite social media platform to use? Mine is, no surprise, YouTube. So thank you so much for watching, and remember to subscribe for new writing, editing, and publishing videos every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time!